Well, 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 ladies and gentlemen, it's time for another DADCAW. It is 6/9/2020. Well, that's epic. Nice. So, what has happened lately? Well, what is 6/9/2020 anyway? It's a Tuesday. It's 3:17 in the afternoon. 3693. Who would have guessed? So I've just saved the details for a new video called Hydra Melee AI Castover number 2. For whatever reason, it said that my video was published. YouTube is a great service, by the way. If you guys have not used YouTube as somebody who's actually trying to upload content at a regular basis, you simply don't know how annoying the whole thing is. And boy, is it fucking annoying. So, well, anyway, that video is public now, so have some fun with that. Yeah, the castovers have been something that I've been doing lately, and they come as a response to a general lack of formalized content about Hydra beyond like the DADCAWs, like dedicated to, hey, when you click on this video, you know I'm going to be talking about Hydra, and you know that every video in this series is going to be talking about Hydra, or like custom content production related to StarCraft stuff. And I feel like that is a valuable output of video content. It's a place for people who don't feel like clicking on a stream and digging through the VODs to figure out where it is I said something insightful or educational or interesting. It's a place to showcase Hydra's progress and a lot of stuff similar to that. Related to Hydra's progress lately is some changes to... Well, not really changes to a idea or a pipeline per se, because it's all relative. It's all theoretical on paper right now. But the idea was recently to spend some time figuring out whether or not I wanted to actually have any pre-placed units on the map in Hydra's campaign missions, and also whether or not I wanted to reduce the amount of limited tech in missions. So basically, actually making it so that more of the tech tree was available in every single map, so that players had plenty of time to experiment even from the first mission. Now, the first mission of Hydra, the first Terran mission, does allow you as the Terran player to go all the way up to every unit in the factory besides the Paladin, which is a new unit that hasn't even been implemented yet. I think, Ghosts, Nuke Silos, maybe that could be reserved for the second mission if necessary, but Ghosts and Nuke Silos are currently in there. It restricts battlecruisers, but not science vessels. It restricts Azazels, which is a science vessel escalation. I feel like that's fine. And it restricts some other stuff as well. It restricts, I think, very, very minimal other things, but it's like some of the new units, Cyprians, Shamans. Currently not in the test build, I should say, but this is the plan going forward, is like to restrict some of these units. And that's actually quite a lot of the tech tree available to the player from the get-go. Something that I was not necessarily expecting would happen when I first started working on the map. It does mean that some of the map may end up being less balanced or less well put together for such a expansive tech tree and so many different options available to all players, including the Zerg, of course, because the Zerg have, similar tech at their disposal. They have all the way up to, I think, Ultralisks is the plan. Not Defilers, but Ultralisks. And, maybe it's fine for them to get Defilers, honestly, because if the Terran players have science vessels, they have tools to stop that. But certainly interesting as a way to see how distinct Hydra is from other campaigns, that you have access to a lot of tech from the first mission. And this is a campaign that introduces a lot of new tech and a lot of changes to old tech. So in that sense, it's kind of similar to the idea that Hydra has very little pre-placed junk on the map. In fact, you pretty much only ever will see pre-placed stuff when it comes to set pieces and, neutral command centers that you can infest or something as Zerg, and that you have to destroy as Terrans or Protoss to stop them from being able to do stuff like that. And, time will tell if we end up reworking the infestation mechanic, but there's plenty of different things that you might consider from the perspective of what you're used to from a custom campaign and what you might even idealized in a custom campaign. Say, hey, in my ideal world, my custom campaign or the custom campaign I'm playing as a player would include, more even, fair, balanced starting positions between players, including AI, and more engaging enemies from the AI, and engaging allies, and large battlegrounds to fight with, and large tech tree changes, and large amounts of tech tree availability. Like, even if you were expecting or idealizing something like this, Hydra still is probably more than what most people would expect. And it's not that I'm patting myself on the back for that, because I view it as the responsibility of anybody who makes a custom campaign to set the genre of custom campaigns aside, the expectations of that genre aside, and instead say, I'm going to make something that is better than any of that, but not because I want to make something better than any of that, because I want to make something that is objectively good, that justifies the time needed to play it, and produces a reliably satisfying experience for the end user. I mean, that's my goal, is to produce something that I genuinely enjoy playing. And so far that's been a success. And so it just so happens that I've genuinely enjoyed playing something that a lot of other people have genuinely enjoyed playing. And, you know, I don't think that it's just dumb luck that that's happened, but I also don't think that it's a guarantee either that my tastes would line up with everybody else's. So what sets Hydra apart in that sense from the average custom campaign is not just the large swaths of tech tree changes. It's not just the focus of making AI as an engaging aspect of the overall production. It's the fact that Hydra makes this very inflexible approach, takes this very inflexible approach and says, this project will always have these elements. These are going to be relentlessly consistent in your experience of playing Hydra, be it campaign maps or melee maps. Starting units will be the same. Tech tree availability will be very free, and very rarely will you see units actually restricted. Once you have them, the first time you encounter a mission that adds new tech tree options to your arsenal, they will never be taken away again. There will never be some story-related gimmick that supersedes or interferes with your ability to adapt to the ever-evolving metagame as more and more tools come online. And by the early missions, by the 4th or 5th map in each campaign, you will have access to the complete entire tech tree of Hydra. And from that point onward, every mission will give you the same exact tech tree options, but the differences and distinctions in your play will come from your improvement as a player, your enemies' improvements, and your enemies' variety and diversity, and the fact that there's going to be different enemies, the fact that there's going to be different environments. The maps themselves will favor different strategies, and perhaps make some concessions against certain other strategies to make it so that those are not completely void of value, but providing a little bit more of a preference towards another at the expense of a different strategy. So maybe air is not as effective. Similar to melee maps, actually. Similar to ladder games in the current live version of the game. If you play some of the ladder maps that are out there that have really open, flat areas where there aren't really any ridges to harass ground units from, then that morphs things like PvT and TVZ, or those two matchups in particular, because you have mutalisks that are trying to pick off marine bioballs, you have carriers that are trying to pick off Goliaths, and it's a lot easier for those air units to do so if there are a lot of ridges. So something as basic as how many ridges are on your map can dramatically change how the matchups play and how favored a certain strategy is. And in some cases, I am not as well-versed as I should be in that, and part of that is because I'm not as well-versed into StarCraft's melee gameplay as I really should be, and I am consistently doing more research, but there is only so many hours in the day, right? There are so many hours in the day. And another part of it is because Hydra is a very different game than StarCraft, vanilla StarCraft or Brood War or whatever actually is. It's a completely different metagame. It's focused on team battles anyway, in the campaign missions and in the melee maps that we end up making. There's way more team games than there are 1v1 maps, and that's not an accident. That's because we've designed it to be that way, right? We've designed Hydra to be more engaging for large numbers of players. And that aside, we've also dealt with a huge number of tech tree changes just recently. Like, we've been rebalancing units like the Cyprian and the Shaman and the Legionnaire. We've been bug fixing so that certain units are more true to form, true to what they should have been. We've been improving the game engine to better support additional units on top of it, and eventually we will add additional units that have already been planned and some units that have not been formally planned on the documentation for the new game state, but are definitely planned in the future. All of these things, these features and modifications and rebalancings and additions, result in an ever-evolving game state that really won't ever be finished until the last unit is added, right? And the last balance patch ships, in theory. So it's definitely a different environment to be operating within. It's too early to really define a meta that will last for a long time. And I don't think that such a thing can even happen in Hydra or in vanilla Brood War either, because vanilla StarCraft ladder involves finding matchups that work well on certain maps, and then the map rotation comes in, and suddenly certain strategies do not behave the same way, certain matchups do not behave the same way. Very similar to Hydra in that sense, where we're going to have constantly an influx of new maps, it seems. And even if we don't, we're going to have a large number of changes to the game state every now and then until the project is finished sometime, maybe next year at the earliest, I would imagine. And that's going to be a very long-lasting aspect of the game, and we're going to see a lot of content being produced for the game, be it melee maps, be it more campaign maps, from myself and from other people. And I don't really think that the end is in sight in that respect. And so within all of that chaos of updating the game so many times and constantly having new maps and new content made, new battlegrounds to experiment within and to take fights within, we have the consistency of understanding that from everything that I make anyway, your melee maps are always going to have the same starting units as your campaign maps, and your tech tree availability is not going to be so variable, right? Now, that being said, maybe the starting units will sometimes change for certain players, but it'll be in a symmetrical fashion. It'll be in a fashion where maybe it's a 3v3 and one player on each team has more starting assets or a better starting position relative to their allies in terms of defensibility or resource availability or something to that effect, where the map balance itself skews in favor of certain players because perhaps they've been there to begin with. They got first dibs on selecting a base, and then they started playing the game before you arrived, in theory. So there's plenty of different cases where that might come up, and I intend to make a podcast with Mesk sometime soon to discuss this very concept of how am I going to change the core components of an RTS, such like, starting units, etc. How should I justify? How could I justify changes to the core gameplay loop in that sense? And that is going to be a tough question to answer, but one that I do think has an answer. It's just one that I haven't found just yet. And in the meantime, you can definitely rest assured that there will be plenty of options for tech. There will be still options for onboarding and for tutorialization and for experimentation within these maps. And there will be plenty of options for remaining consistent with certain things, like knowing, I have this unit. Well, it's never going to be taken away from me unless I decide not to make it, right? So the option will always be there from every mission from this point onward. And I'm always going to start out with relatively similar starting units. It's never going to be that I start out with a giant base. Maybe I'll start out with a supply depot or a gateway or something like that. But even that can dramatically morph the early game, as we've seen just from adding 2 more workers and 50 more minerals to the melee early game. It dramatically morphs and accelerates the early stages of the game. And I don't think it's any surprise that many games have ended before 20 minutes as a result, because that happens even in vanilla StarCraft, and obviously vanilla StarCraft doesn't have those early game accelerations. So, a lot of stuff is still in flux. A lot of stuff is still yet to be determined if it will be final, but I do believe that we are onto something really, really epic. And I think Hydra will definitely continue to turn heads when people see it in action. So thank you once again for being a part of this epic journey that we make, this odyssey that we make through time and through the development of Project Hydra. And thank you for following it. Thank you for consuming this content. And I think that's it. That's all I have to say so far. Have a little faith. Make sure that you contest me where you think I'm wrong, but understand that I've been doing this for quite a while. I have every interest invested into trying to make this as good as it can be, because I too want something better than everything else that people have put out thus far. I too want something that I genuinely enjoy playing, and so far Hydra has been that. We will see if it remains that way for evermore, or at some point if it loses its luster. But for now, it's pretty epic. So yeah, bye.